Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are finally talking about Big Brother 24 and my preseason power ranking for this season. Now, it's sort of crazy how we literally just got the cast today. I am recording this on Tuesday, July 5th, literally the day before the game starts, but that's just how it is. They decided to wait this long to release the cast, but it is what it is. But as usual with these preseason power rankings, I'm going to be ranking each of these players based on how likely it is that I think that they'll win the game based on their bios and what we've gotten from them in the preseason. And admittedly, I feel like a lot of this is going to be speculative, as I feel like I haven't had as much time to really reflect on a lot of these players as I would like, but I'm going to do my best here. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 16, the player I believe has the least chance of winning the game for me is Terence. Now, admittedly, I feel like Terence is someone that knows the game at least. I mean, from his Us Weekly interview, he does talk quite a bit about the game, and it's pretty clear that he has at least seen the show before. However, I'm not feeling too great about his overall potential within the game. I mean, for one, he is the oldest person on the cast at 47 years old, which, I mean, again, isn't that old in the grand scheme of things, but compared to the rest of his cast, he is definitely a bit of an outlier here. And honestly, he doesn't give the best answers either with a lot of the game related talk. I mean, when he's asked about what type of players he would least want in his alliance, he says someone who's kind of fickle, and he really gives us his vibe of someone who isn't really adaptable, and he is someone who is very regimented, which isn't ideal for a game of Big Brother. He also says that he would rather take his closest ally to the final two, saying he wants to go up against the best, which is not ideal either. So at the end of the day, he is someone who I'm not feeling too great about on the offset. Now, there is certainly potential for him to do relatively well. I mean, we literally saw last season Tiffany do pretty well, despite her not giving the best preseason answers and being a bit on the older side of her cast. But if we're just looking at the offset, I feel like Terrence is the person I had the least confidence in based on what we see so far. So because of that, he is here at number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15, and we have someone who's pretty similar to Terrence, and admittedly, they probably have a lower ceiling than someone like a Terrence, but also I feel like I have a better understanding of where this person's gonna go. But here we have Nicole, and similar to Terrence, she is another older member of the cast. She is 41, and similar to Terrence, I'm not in love with a lot of her answers that she gives. Again, she says she would take her ally to the final two over everything else. She really exudes a lot of this honor and integrity in a lot of her answers, where she wants to be perceived as a fierce warrior, and how she wants to take out floaters in the game, as she wants to be able to give it all, and that she wants everyone to be all in. So for me, those aren't particularly great answers either. I mean, she also says that she really looks up to Derek, Xavier, Tiffany, and Nicole are her favorite players, and specifically cites Xavier as someone who played with a lot of integrity, which is not my ideal either. And admittedly, I feel like Nicole probably has less game knowledge than someone like a Terrence. I feel like Terrence has at least watched more of the show, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, I don't feel like either of them have too much potential coming into it. Now, admittedly, she could come in and do pretty well. However, I feel like she is also less likely to win competitions than certain other people. She doesn't seem as physically strong as a lot of the other players, which isn't great, as she is someone who cares a lot about competition. So we'll definitely have to see how it plays out. But off the offset, I'm not feeling too great about her either. And because of that, she is here at number 15. Now moving on to number 14. And we also have someone who I'm not entirely sure what to do with, but I kind of landed them here. And here we have Daniel. And Daniel's interesting because he is someone who, again, has watched a lot of the show. He's watched the show from the beginning. And I feel like he does at least have a decent amount of game knowledge involved. Now, the main reason I have him this low, however, is that I don't feel like he's super likely to integrate super well within the majority. I mean, he says himself that his type of humor might be a bit skewed, and that he's probably someone who isn't afraid to offend certain people, and that like he understands that people tend to judge him for certain things like his sense of humor, which does make me a bit concerned over how well he'll integrate socially. And through that, that does make me a bit worried about him. Now, granted, he does give some good answers. Like, he talks about how Dan's his favorite player. He also says that he would take the person he feels he could beat to the end. So there are some good answers here. However, I'm just worried about how well he'll do socially, and I'm not entirely sure whether he'll be able to get into the majority alliance to avoid being an early boot. So because of that, I do have him here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we have someone who is very interesting, if you ask me, and someone who, like Daniel, is someone who knows the game pretty well. However, I'm not entirely sure how well they'll do, but here we have Brittany, and Brittany is a very interesting case here. I mean, she's 32 years old, and she's a pretty clear super fan. She makes that pretty clear in across her bio. The fact that she is someone who knows the game pretty well and someone who has seen the show. And through that, I feel like she is someone who will probably be pretty good strategically, at least. However, socially, I do have my reservations. I feel like she is someone who can come off as pretty in your face and intense, at least based on what we saw from her interview and even her cast photo and some of her answers as well. It makes me a bit worried that she could struggle to get into the majority to a degree. And through that, I'm not entirely sure how well she will be able to do. Now, to be fair, she is able to get into the majority alliance, and I feel like she is someone who will understand her best move. I feel like she is someone who's going to play pretty hard. It's just a matter of whether she can get into the majority alliance in order to do well. And through that, I do feel like she's a bit high variance. However, with her amount of game knowledge, I do have a bit more confidence in her than some of the people we just talked about. So because of that, I do have her here at number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12, and we have someone who I actually think could make it decently far into the game, and I feel like they could integrate into a majority alliance. However, I was a bit underwhelmed by some of the answers that they gave in their bio, but here we have Jasmine. And on paper, Jasmine does seem like a pretty suitable player in the sense that she's sort of in the middle of the age group for the season. She seems good enough socially. She seems pretty likable. And I assume she'd be good enough physically in order to potentially win some cons for herself. You know, there is some stuff there. However, her answers were not the best, where obviously she does give the trust no one as her best advice, which is something at least. But then, like, when she talks about how, like, what others may dislike about her, again, a lot of her answers are pretty short in general. And she talks about how she tends to speak her mind, which is something, I guess. She talks about how she would go with the house to help the overall alliance. Again, very short bio answers. Now, on the face of it, those weren't enough to propel her towards the bottom. However, then we got to our Us Weekly interview, which highlighted some of her game a bit more, which definitely lowered my opinion of her. Again, she's one of these people who says she would rather take her closest ally to the end, saying she wants to go up against the best. Not the best answer in my view. She talks about how Derek, Cody, and Tiffany are her favorite players, which is something, I guess. But through that, I'm not entirely confident in Jasmine's strategic ability. I feel like she is someone who probably isn't going to be in the driver's seat at all times, per se. And even when it comes to putting herself into the best position to win, I'm not entirely sure if she's going to be willing to do that. So because of that, I can't have her too high, and she is here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11, and we have probably the biggest question mark for me, at least, in terms of where this person could go, as I could see this person really going either way. But in number 11, we do have Indy. And Indy's interesting as she was originally from Brazil, and now she lives in California. She's also a corporate flight attendant, which I assume would translate to her being pretty good socially. Now, admittedly, just looking at her bio responses, they're not necessarily the best. I mean, when asked what types of people she doesn't want to align with, she says the lazy ones and that she doesn't like lazy people. She says that people may dislike her personality and that she's very straightforward. And, you know, like, those aren't necessarily the best answers. But then we jump to our Us Weekly interview, which was definitely a bit more better in my opinion. I do have a bit more confidence in her ability to integrate into a majority alliance. And through that, I could see her making a deep run, per se. Now, will she necessarily have what it takes to win? That I'm not entirely sure of at this time. But I do feel a bit more confident in her to make it somewhat far. But for all I know, she could also be a bit high variance at points. I mean, it really just depends on how people react to her and whether her personality, as she describes it, will rub some people the wrong way. So I feel like for now, I kind of have to leave her here at number 11, though I could definitely see her jumping up if she's able to find her footing in the game. Now moving on to number 10, and I feel like these next two players are pretty high variance and pretty similar in a lot of ways, but we have the person who I believe is the more high variance between the two, and here we have Pooch. And Pooch is a very interesting character on the face of it. I mean, he's very obviously a big fan of the show. I mean, he's seen every season, and he definitely talks a lot about the game, and he definitely carries through a lot of game knowledge here. So through that, I do think he does have some potential to do well if he can find his footing. He talks about how he'll take the person he feels he can beat. He says Dr. Will is his favorite player. He'll do what's best for his alliance, and he will actively work to save his ally at any given turn. So I feel like that is something that can help him out. He's also an assistant football coach, which I assume means he's pretty good physically. I mean, he's pretty young as well. I feel like he's someone who could win comps and can definitely get himself into a good position. However, he does say a couple things within his interview that does make me question how well he'll do. In particular, he said that he would try to flip the vote to help his personal game and that he's here to make for good TV, which, again, I don't know if he'll actually do, and I doubt he would actually throw away his game to make for good TV, but still, the fact that he said that, isn't ideal. And in general, he does come off as someone who could be prone to suspicion. I could definitely see some people seeing him as a bit sketchy, and through that, people could grow to see him as a big threat. So I think those are definitely question marks over Pooch and how well he'll be able to adapt and to really put people at ease with his personality. I mean, he definitely indicates that in his bio, saying that he wants to show that he's a trustworthy person. It's just that whether this cast will allow him to do that will be a big factor in whether he'll succeed. So it's because of that I can't have him too high, although I was pretty impressed by his overall game knowledge from his interview. So because of that, he is here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have another person who I could definitely see going either way, although I do have a bit more confidence in this person to fly under the radar. But here we have Michael. And similar to Brittany and Pooch, I mean, Michael is one of these super duper fans, has seen every season, is someone who is very knowledgeable about the game. And I do have a lot of confidence in him to recognize what his optimal move is. Now, admittedly, I do think where he could run into trouble is people seeing him as a potential threat. I mean, he does talk a bit about how people could potentially see him as a nerd, and through that, not really see him as someone super likely to win a lot of competitions. I think that could definitely be a concern from him early on. I could also see one of the more stronger alpha males, people like Marvin or Pooch, potentially targeting him as a big threat if they were to win HOH early on. So there are definitely danger spots for him early on, and those are things that largely keep me from putting him higher on the list. However, the reason I have him above some other high variance players is that I do have a decent amount of confidence in him socially. I think he can definitely connect with a decent amount of people in the house. And I do think he recognizes some of his pitfalls a bit more than some other people, both in terms of his perception, but also him recognizing that he is a very intense person and that he needs to reel it back. I definitely have more confidence in him to do that than someone like a Brittany, for example. So I definitely think there is some potential for him to get into a majority alliance, and I feel like if he's able to gain some power, that he's able to make moves that will better his game. So I do have some confidence in Michael here. However, it's just those question marks with him early on, the potential for him to be targeted early on, that does lead me to put him here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and this is another person who I could definitely see going either way, and I actually think this person could have some potential to be an early boot. However, I was somewhat impressed by their interview answers, and here we have Alyssa. Now, on the surface, I wasn't super impressed by a lot of her bio answers. I mean, a lot of her answers were kind of generic. I mean, she talks about how she doesn't like loud, obnoxious players. She talks about how people will underestimate her, which, to be fair, I mean, almost everyone said that people will underestimate them. And in general, she doesn't really jump off the page to me. And she definitely seems like someone who can definitely get into some trouble early on, per se. However, after listening to her interview, I do have a bit more confidence in her game ability. I mean, she talks about how she would take her closest ally to the end. She talks about how she looks up to people like Janelle, Brittany, and Casey as her favorite players. And I do feel like she is someone who could definitely do well within the game. She definitely won't get bogged down by some similar issues as someone like an Alyssa did last season. And I do have some confidence in her to get into a majority alliance. Now, whether a lot of that will translate to a lot of power in the game remains to be seen. However, after listening to her interview and really just getting to know her better, I feel like she is someone who could definitely escape some of those early pitfalls that someone like a Michael or a Pooch can, or even someone like a Brittany can. But it's just there are certain other question marks over how well she'll do in competitions, whether she'll be able to get into the position that she needs and win the power that she needs in order to get herself into the best position to win. That does lead me to put her here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we actually have someone who I actually think is pretty similar to Alyssa in a lot of ways. However, I was slightly more impressed by their answers in their bio, but here we have Paloma. And I do think Paloma has a bit more potential to do well in the game than someone like a Melissa. I was slightly more impressed by a lot of the answers that she gave. I mean, she talks about how people might perceive her as a bit ditzy, again, the underestimated route. I mean, she talks about how she understands that she's a well-rounded player and that people may not like that fact, so she may try to hide it to a degree. Though, again, that could also raise some concerns about her being targeted early. However, when we move on to her interview, she does get some good answers. She says she would take the ally to the end, says that she particularly likes Tyler a lot, and that she'll work to save an ally without being conspicuous. So I think through that, Paloma actually gave a pretty impressive performance during a lot of her interviews, which does give me some confidence in her ability to do well. However, again, similar to Alyssa and some other people we talked about, there is some worry there about whether she could be targeted early on for being a big threat or someone that could fly under the radar. However, if she's able to get to that point in the game, I feel like she could definitely do pretty well. So because of that, I do have Paloma relatively high, although there are still some concerns there, which do lead me to put her here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we got a pretty interesting player to talk about here. And here we have Joseph. And Joseph seems like an interesting player on the face of it. I mean, if we're going through his bio, he definitely gives a lot of decent answers. Like he talks about how he's a pretty well-rounded player, how he's pretty good physically. I mean, he seems to be in pretty good shape. He's also a lawyer, so I assume he's pretty smart and probably going to be good strategically. I don't have the best sense of how big of a fan he is and how well he actually knows the game per se, but I definitely have confidence in him to be able to pick it up. In general, there are things that I like about him. However, I do worry a bit about whether he'll be perceived as a physical threat from early on, and considering that we have pretty limited information about him as he was literally a last second addition, and I haven't had a chance to actually watch his interview. I'm not too sure how well he's going to be able to diffuse his threat level early on. And while he could definitely win some comps and get into some power, I'm not entirely sure whether he'll be able to avoid being targeted later on in the game. So there are definitely some question marks there. However, if he is able to survive a lot of that and get into power, I actually have a lot of confidence in him to do pretty well. So there are definitely points where I think he could have a lot of potential here. However, there are also opportunities for him to be targeted. And considering I'm not entirely sure how well he actually knows the game, I can't have him towards the very, very top. I decided to leave him here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5. And I'm sure some people may question whether I have this person a bit too high. But to be fair, I haven't really checked a lot of the discourse to see a lot of these people's thoughts. This is just my first impressions of these people. But I actually feel somewhat good about this player. And here we have Amira. Now, Amira is interesting because on one hand, she is one of these people that does talk a lot about how she's being honest and how she wants to play a relatively straightforward game for the most part. And she talks about how she doesn't want to align with two-timers, people that are double dipping per se, and people that can't commit to one alliance, which isn't ideal. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of that approach throughout a lot of it. And obviously with other people that have said those type of things, people like Nicole, for instance, I have put them relatively lower on the list. However, the thing that separates Amira for me is that I do feel like she has a decent amount of awareness for the game as well. I mean, I love her advice answer about how it's okay to cry if you have to cry. It's okay when you want to celebrate. I mean, I do like that answer a lot. And she also talks about how she wants to go for her own individual game. She says how she understands the need to think about her long-term game and whether that will involve her breaking away from her alliance. Like, she is definitely someone who seems a bit more self-interested at the end of the day than a lot of these other players that talk about being yourself She talks about how she would take the person she feels she can beat towards the end, says Nicole Franzel's her favorite player, and she'll try to flip the vote and try to do her best, what's best for her game. So I feel like she is someone I actually have a decent amount of confidence in, and I can see her doing pretty well, all things considered. And I also feel like if she's able to win some comps or get into the majority alliance, then she could potentially do well. However, it's those reservations of whether she'll be able to be as cutthroat as certain other players that do make me put her a bit lower on the list. However, she is still someone that I'm feeling somewhat good about coming into this, and because of that, I do have her here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and I feel like from this point on, I feel pretty good about these 4 players. I feel like if I had to put money on one of these 4 players win the game, it'd probably be these 4. However, number 4, we definitely have someone who I actually had at my winner pick at one point, and really I did consider each of these people as my winner pick at one point during the afternoon. But after just thinking about it some more, I decided to have Matt here at number 4. And the thing about Matt is he's definitely someone who I think has a lot of upside. I could definitely see him being someone like a Tyler from BB20, and that he seems to be this pretty laid back dude, someone who can definitely get in and really chill with a lot of the people there, really put people at ease, but also be someone that's pretty good at competitions. It can definitely come through in the clutch if it comes down to it. I definitely have confidence in him based on what we see from him so far. He talks about how he would take the person he feels he can beat, talks about how people like Rockstar, Christie, David Alexander, and of course Tyler are his favorite players. And through that, I do have some confidence in him. He definitely has the right idea coming into the game. He also says that he would try to align with the HOH in order to try to save his allies. So he definitely does seem a bit more flexible compared to a lot of these other players. Through that, I do consider him one of the more likely contenders here. However, the main question for me is how much of this is just speculation? I mean, how much he will be able to actually translate a lot of what he has to offer into the game? I mean, he definitely says that he wants to go for being an absolute competition beast. Now, it's not entirely clear to me whether that means he'll try to win competitions from the start or if he'll just wait until he absolutely needs to win competitions. I really hope he does tend towards the latter here. Now, I also think he could definitely be targeted in certain situations early on. He says how he doesn't like get along super well with stereotypical alpha males. And while there are plenty of people on this cast that say the same thing, I mean, that could definitely get him to trouble with certain people like a Marvin or a Pooch, for instance. So those are definitely concerns that I have for him coming in. However, he is still someone I think could do pretty well, and if he is someone that ends up being a dominant force in the season, I wouldn't be surprised there. However, I feel like the top 3 people are a bit more conventional and people that I feel like are a bit more likely to be in that position, whereas Matt is more so a dark horse that I think can come through. So because of that, I do have him here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and this is another person who I think could do well. Although admittedly, I think they gave a bit more questionable responses in their interview, but here we have Taylor, and I believe this is the highest ranked woman on the list, which again is sort of a spoiler for the rest of the list, but Taylor is someone who I think could do well. Now, admittedly, as I said, their bio answers aren't necessarily the best. I mean, she says that she wants people to perceive her as someone looking for a showman's, and I kind of get what she means there in the sense that she wants people to underestimate her and to just see her as a pretty face. But I also think it could also lead to people assuming that and then targeting her and some other person in response. So I definitely fear that she could end up in that Alyssa position. Even if she isn't looking for a showman's, people could just assume that about her and put her in a bad position there. Although admittedly, I do have a bit more confidence in someone like a Taylor than Alyssa to integrate socially. She definitely seems like the social butterfly type, and through that, I do have confidence in her to build bonds with a lot of people and sort of prove people wrong. She talks a lot about how she's an optimistic person and that she definitely wants to be outgoing to a lot of people, although recognizing too that that could lead to some issues there. She talks about how Danielle Reyes and Janelle are her favorite players, again highlighting how she is someone who, while having gone to the show more recently, is someone who has done her homework to a degree. Says she would take the person they're less close with to the final 2, as it would take an ally and put them on the jury, someone that would vote for her. So it's good that she's willing to think of the game in that term. She doesn't get the best answer about what she wants in an alliance partner. She says that she wants people who are not very good at strategizing, which I kind of get in the sense that she wants to be the mastermind behind it all, but I feel like that will be something that's a bit hard to come by, and she will have to deal with that. Also, don't love her response about how strategy is not her strong suit and how people who do focus so much on strategy tend to get targeted early. Again, I kind of get what she's saying there, but I mean, you still need to have some strategy at the end of the day. But the reason I have her this high, despite those responses, is that I do have enough confidence in her socially to where she could overcome some strategic issues that she may face along the way. And plus, given her age at 27, I definitely feel like she could be in good shape to win some competitions and give herself some power. So I definitely do have some confidence in Taylor coming in, and I wouldn't be surprised if she does become a big figure on the season as well. However, I feel like the top two players definitely feel like a more complete package, at least on paper. So because of that, I do have to leave Taylor here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and I feel like these top two seem pretty definitive for me, or at least based on what we know about these people so far. And I feel like these are pretty safe bets for the most part in terms of my winner pick, and it's just a matter of the order. But number 2, we actually have the person who I think is a bit more conventional, but someone who I personally don't feel as attached to, and probably am going to be taking a bit of a risk here in putting them here. But here we have Kyle. And Kyle on paper seems like a pretty strong candidate here. I mean, he definitely comes off as a pretty big super fan, talks a lot of strategy during his interviews. I mean, granted, he does say Tyler is his favorite player, but he definitely comes off as someone who understands the game pretty well. He's pretty well rounded, pretty good physically, pretty good socially, pretty good strategically. He gives some pretty good answers along the way, like how he talks about the fact that he tries to make light of every situation. He's the type of guy who tries to make a joke and make people laugh to feel better. I mean, he talks about how a lot of things depend on the stage in the game and how he really wants to look out for himself later on in the game. He talks about, just being yourself, but then again, a lot of other people say that during the interview. He says he would take the person he feels he can beat, but acknowledges that things can change as he gets to know these people better within the game. He says he'll stick with the house and let the ally go. Again, not really trying to make too much waves, which at the end of the day might be a bit of a red flag. However, he also acknowledges that at the end of the day, there are plenty of opportunities to try to align with certain people and definitely seek out new opportunities. So Kyle definitely seems like a pretty standard pick here, like definitely someone who can definitely do well and take control of the game. And unlike someone like a Michael, I feel like he is someone who is definitely more likely to make it further in the game and definitely is less likely to fall into a lot of the pitfalls that can define some of these super fans that can definitely get into trouble throughout the game. However, I admittedly don't feel as attached to him coming into it, and I feel like a lot of that is just based on his archetype and what we've seen from him so far, to where I'm not entirely sure if he will be the dominant force once he enters the game, as I feel like the number one person, yes, while they seem more like a risk, is someone who I feel like could reasonably do well as well compared to Kyle. So because of that, I am leaving Kyle here at number 2. And now at number 1, my winner pick coming into Big Brother 24 may seem a bit unconventional, but I definitely have my rationale. But here we have Monty. And the thing about Monty is I feel like he is a very well-rounded player. I mean, he's pretty good physically. I mean, he is a personal trainer and definitely talks about that in his bio, how he's 6'4", 235, in pretty decent shape. But he's also pretty good, strategically as well. He talks about how he's pretty smart and how he has a mechanical engineering degree. And I feel like he's a pretty affable guy as well. I mean, he wants people who are pretty positive for the most part. He is a pretty positive person, and he very much is someone who doesn't want to get into too much drama. He also talks about how he doesn't want to share too much information and how he doesn't want to overshare per se, and how he does plan to go with the house to help his overall alliance for a lot of the game. I think he definitely understands the game pretty well. Now, if we look at his interview answers, he talks a lot about how people like Derek and Tyler and Xavier are his favorite players, but he also cites Donnie and Hayden, definitely two interesting picks as well, and shows how he has watched more than just BB23 and BB16. And he says how when it comes to saving his ally, it will depend on whether the HOH targeting his ally is within his alliance. So, yes, he does give the it depends situation as the answer, but he does clarify a bit more, showing his understanding of the game as well. And in general, unlike someone like a Marvin, I feel like Monty may have an easier time managing his threat level than someone like a Marvin, where yes, he is pretty good physically, but he definitely is someone who I feel like will be pretty effective at downplaying that and really just coming off as a pretty good guy. I feel like compared to everyone in this cast, he's definitely the most similar to Xavier from last season. And admittedly, that could also be a downfall for him as well if people are looking out for someone like an Xavier or really anyone like trying to recreate a cookout. But I guess we'll have to see how the game plays out there. And I feel like Monty is someone who does seem like a pretty well-rounded player and someone who could do very well in the game, in my personal opinion. So I understand why people may pick Kyle or Taylor or certain other people as their winner pick, but I feel like coming into the season, Monty is the person I have the most confidence in. Definitely someone I can see doing reasonably well within the game. And it's because of that I am declaring Monty my winner pick for BB24. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. And obviously, we have Big Brother 24 starting tonight. By the time you're watching this video, there's a good chance that it's about to start or possibly has already started. So I am planning to cover the season as usual with my weekly power rankings. Now, I think for the time being, I'm probably going to update them on Wednesdays, as that'll be like a pretty good time. I mean, once the nominations are set, I feel like that should be a pretty reasonable time. Now, obviously, Survivor SA could get in the way with that. I mean, depending on what the schedule for that will be, I mean, that'll be pretty interesting to navigate, but that's just how it's going to be. I'll be sure to update you guys accordingly. And something else I want to announce is that I now have a Discord server. The link to join is in the description, but I do plan to use that throughout the summer, like during the season. So if you guys want more real-time talk about the season, I mean, feel free to join that. It should be pretty fun. We already have some people in there. Should be pretty fun as well. So stay tuned for all that. But for now, that is the video. See ya.